Victorum Gaming fans and Hail Caesar fans, we're back with another video in our series covering the different factions for the game. And so we're moving right along here in the classical period. So today we're going to take a look at what's called the Later Hoplite Greek list, which basically covers Greeks from the 5th through the 3rd centuries BC. In our previous video we looked at, I think the list was just called Hoplite Greeks, but that was basically 7th century through 5th century. So this is kind of the successor to that. So things like the Delian League, Peloponnesian War, Sicilian expedition, Corinthian War, Battle of Leuctra, Third Sacred War, etc. So there's lots of good stuff to look at here, but in a really interesting time period. So especially the Peloponnesian War, you could just go absolutely wild with collecting various forces for that. Lots of potential there for the painting and hobby aspects of it too. So, but let's see how this list stacks up against that other previous hoplite list. There's a lot of similarities with just a couple of minor tweaks just to sort of represent obviously that passage of time here, since we're basically sort of 200 years ahead or down the road from the previous list. So, but organization-wise, still fairly similar. So we got 75% or more has to be infantry, and again, we're not counting skirmishers. Of that, basically hoplites have to still be 50% of the infantry, and again, not counting skirmishers. So any flavor of hoplite here, basically. And then Spartans can be up to 50% of the hoplites. And it's pretty cool overall just to have, like, again, all these different flavors of hoplite and all that. Although it would be nice to basically be able to feel like, you know, if you want to do 100% Spartans or Athenians and stuff, if they would differentiate that at some point. But you know, there's things like house rules that you can play, or you know, nowadays with their new skirmish game from Warlord, SPQR, you can kind of focus on that more if you want to play some more smaller scale battles, which you could still play larger games of that too. But moving on, cavalry could also be up to 25% of the army, and again, the cavalry we get for the Greeks here overall is not that great, but you still at least have some access to cavalry. And then the usual division and skirmisher breakups there. So what do we got? We start with the Spartans here, and again, heavy infantry, and that's what the Spartans do. Sort of the cream of the crop here. Really doesn't get better for hoplite infantry. So you got that clash and sustain of 7, 4 up morale, and then they're drilled, stubborn, elite, and phalanx. And yes, you are going to pay the points cost for that, 41 points a unit. But you know, these things, the Spartan units are, you know, so many of the lists we've been looking at as we've made our progress through the ages here. But you know, any of those infantry lists or other factions, really, that you know, primarily consist of like medium infantry, light infantry, skirmisher type infantry. If you're presenting like a wall of Spartan hoplites to them, you're going to see why the Spartans were so good, basically. And the stats tend to reflect it here along with the special rules. So you know, there's not much that you know, medium infantry with like 5 up morale saves, or 4 up morale, or sorry, 5 or 6 up morale saves, stuff like that. Just they're not going to stand up to the Spartans. And then you have more elite infantry here. So elite, just regular elite hoplite infantry with long spears. So really could be like the elite of any of the other city-states. But basically same stats, but just a few fewer special rules. So they're still elite and phalanx, but they're not drilled and stubborn like the Spartans. So would have probably been cool to see drilled here as well, but obviously stubborn makes more sense for the Spartans too. But still 6 points cheaper, but you still get some really awesome infantry there. And then we have basically just regular hoplite infantry, and regular still is sporting that great stat line, and they're just phalanx for, again, a little bit more cheaper there, so 32 points a unit. And then finally we get the cheap end of the hoplites, which is basically the levy hoplite infantry with long spears, and we see a slight dip in stats here, so still respectable. That's basically medium infantry skill level there with the 6s, but still the heavy infantry armor or morale, however you want to label it. So they definitely have that extra durability, which they'll need because, again, they're throwing just slightly fewer dice. But they're levies and they're phalanx, but again, we're getting into that pretty cheap point territory there for what you're getting. And again, these are regular size units, not small units. Got to point that out. So you can definitely go wild on that. And as you've kind of noticed, we haven't seen any restrictions here aside from the ones above for the army. So if you want lots and lots of elite hoplite units and you want to do like an all infantry list, you know, go nuts. Spartans can be half of your hoplites. So if you want to, this can be a very elite, punchy type of force with, you know, just hoplite after hoplite unit. They'll need some support, of course, because again, getting in the flanks of phalanxes and stuff like that, flank and rear charges, they don't do so well. But again, you just have access to special rules on demand here, basically. And then for the first time, we see this crop up, which was a new development, but the Thorakitai heavy infantry with spears and javelins, and fairly similar stat lines as the elite or regular heavy hoplites above, 7s, and then the 4, but no special rules, but also just clocking in at 26 points. So, they're not phalanx, but just a solid heavy infantry unit that can do some work. And with spears and javelins to note, so their short range is going to be a little bit nastier. And then we have Thuriophoroi, hopefully pronouncing that right, medium infantry with spears and javelins. So basically the same as the Thorakitai, just a little bit lighter. Again, obviously they're medium infantry, and so a little bit weaker in the fighting prowess there. Morale takes a hit, but also just 23 points a unit. So these are kind of like the hidden little gems to help buff out the rest of your list. Again, if you don't want to go too heavy on the super expensive stuff up above here, these two units are still very, very good and will match up with a lot of the other contemporary lists that we've been looking at as we've made our way through the various lists. So, don't overlook those and get distracted by all the shiny goodness up here. But Thorakitai and Thuriophoroi definitely have something to offer you. And, the opponent might think that they're a little bit on the weak side, potentially, if they're not seeing like Spartans or anything they might recognize as like elite phalanx or something like that. But they'll still be in for a nasty surprise just because, again, these guys have pretty solid stats and all that stuff. And you can get good quantities. Moving on, we got light infantry peltas with spears and javelins. Again, pretty respectable stats there, considering they're light infantry. 20 points a unit. And note, the main unit here is not a small unit, so you can actually get like a full-size unit of the peltasts. But you can also reduce the points to field them as small units. And obviously, the stats take a little bit of a bump there, but it's a pretty hefty discount too, so only 13 points a unit there. But plenty of little shooty, harassing type units to support your main units and also keep those flanks protected. Then we move into skirmisher territory, so armed with javelins and as small units. So again, comparable stats as above, although a little bit weaker on the sustained front there for just 11 points a unit. And then we can start upgrading them again. So we can give them slings instead of javelins, so basically half your units can do that if you want to get some long-range firepower in, and that's only 1 point to upgrade, so it's not bad. And then we have a couple of sort of elite skirmisher upgrades, but you only get one of each. So we can upgrade the skirmisher slingers to Rhodians. So for one unit there, it gives you, again, some more long-range firepower. They're still slingers, but these guys are marksmen, so good stuff there. And then we can have the skirmishers with bows instead of javelins. Again, just one unit, a little bit more long-range firepower, and again, just a 1 point upgrade. And then that one unit could potentially be Cretan archers, which also gives you another access to a marksman unit. So good stuff overall. Might as well take those and pay the points cost. It's not much, but having two units with marksmen is pretty cool. And then last but not least here, the cavalry. So again, the Greek cavalry it's got a little bit of punch to it. These are all small units basically, but again, obviously the sustained stat there is going to really show you, especially with the really low morale. These guys are not meant to like do some like heavy lifting for you. They can take out other light and like small weak units, but again, they're not gonna last all that long, especially as small units. So the medium cavalry does have a little bit of punch with a 6 there, but then again drops off. 19 points for the unit. And then we have the more harassing type cavalry, light cavalry with javelins as small units there. So again, just a small bump in the clash value, but also a hit in the morale value, but only 2 points cheaper. So you're going to have to basically make some choices there, weigh that 2 point difference for the slight difference in stats there. And then one light cavalry unit could be upgraded to Thessalians, which does give you kind of an elite light cavalry unit. Again, it's still just a small unit though. But the stats are basically the same, but they gain feigned flight for 2 extra points, so they'll clock in at 19. So you'll have to decide if having access to that one unit with feigned flight is worth it for you. And then we move on to the commanders. So overall, you have leadership 8 across the board again. So bog standard 8, very solid. And then you do have extra potential to have leadership 9. So if you basically max out on your Spartans, you could be basically considering this like a Spartan-led force. And if you pay the upgrade cost of 25 there, which is basically almost like another unit of hoplites, but you basically get access to leadership 9. And obviously he's kind of a badass in close combat, adding 6 attacks instead of the usual 3 for a general. So, things to weigh there, I guess, if you can afford that extra point cost for those extra 3 attacks. But, leadership 9 obviously lets you be a little bit more aggressive and get more orders successfully completed, at least hopefully, if the dice are with you. But overall, again, very similar to that previous Greek hoplite list with just a couple of new additions, I do believe, in the form of the Thoricatae and the Thuriophori. And I think overall the skirmisher and cavalry things basically stayed exactly the same as did the hoplites, although I think correct me if I'm wrong from the previous video, but I think the levy hoplites were a little bit different in the previous one. But overall, again, this is still basically going to be an infantry-dominated list, obviously with 75% or more having to be infantry, and then most of that being hoplites. So, the cavalry definitely gives you a little bit of mobility and lets you maybe deal with some of those other flanking units that opponents might have, get around to their rear, use them to harass and redirect and things like that. But again, overall, this is just going to be lots and lots of hoplites doing their thing. But you can add that extra little bit of flavor and flexibility, and especially in the form of points cheapness via the Thoricatae and the Thuriophori, because they do give you a little bit of short-ranged firepower there too, and again a new development as well. So, but overall, really good stuff. And again, between Greeks and Romans, those are some of the most commonly played armies. But this lets you ideally field any of the Greek city-states, and again gives you some bonuses maybe if you want to focus on Spartans. But overall, just lots and lots of potential there for building and collecting and painting and modeling and so on and so forth. So especially if you research things like the Peloponnesian War and some of the other things they mention up above here. So and it would be cool to see collect people collecting some of the lesser maybe city-states that maybe are not as much in the limelight. So but having like a for example, a Syracuse themed list, or Corinth or Thebes or something like that. So there's more things beyond Athens and Sparta. So seeing people collect those and play with them would be pretty interesting too. So, but there's lots of potential here, and Warlord does have a pretty extensive range of all that stuff in plastic, at least for the core unit types. Some of the things are still metal, but a couple other companies, so like Victrix again does have some phenomenal plastics for not just hoplites, but some of the skirmisher type troops and Greek cavalry and all that too. So really, if you wanted to be all plastic, combination of minis, you could definitely reach that. So overall, hope you guys enjoyed our little look here at the Later Hoplite list. And if you could, drop us a like and a subscribe if you haven't already, and then stay tuned. We'll be covering more Hail Caesar armies.